The placement of the NIA POW flag on the chair is significant in remembrance of the 2,500 soldiers still missing and unaccounted for in all the wars and conflicts involved in the United States. The American Legion Post Commander George Mumm will now place the flag on the chair. And salute. Commander George Mumm will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please be seated. Thank you, tonight. Thank you, Mrs. 93. We will now have the history of Veterans Day by Alyssa Mariner.
They left their families, their homes, and their lives, not for recognition or fame, or even for honor we bestow on each day. They fought to protect our country, to maintain our way of life. As we honor our veterans and remember their great deeds, let us also salute those who are currently fighting for our freedom. The war on terrorism has helped us all realize how truly unique the American way of life is. The freedom we enjoy is extremely special, and that is why we must defend it. So, now is the time to not only honor those who have fought but are fighting for our freedom. It is also the time for each of us to take part in the defense. The defense of freedom is not just for those in the military. Each of us shares that duty and responsibility. We don't have to join the Army or the Navy or any other organization of defense to actively defend our way of life. We can protect our freedom simply by maintaining it here in America. If we want to preserve our freedom, we must put them into action. For example, by voting in elections or speaking up against injustices. We must also ensure that everyone feels the benefits of freedom. And we can do that by volunteering in our communities or teaching our children what it really means to be American. Veterans Day isn't just a day for veterans. It's a day for all Americans. It's a day to remember why they were fighting, and a day for us all to begin our journey of protecting our freedom and the freedom of many future generations. Thank you for honoring our Veterans Day. Let us walk toward tomorrow still honoring them by living the freedom they protect.
Alyssa, and thank you, Ms. Barnes. We will now have the reading of the poem, Thank You to the American Warrior, by Hannah Miller.
From the colonist to rebel to the soldier of today, my thanks be to you. I know not what else to say, since the words I do not have to give the tribute that is due. So simple, heartfelt thanks, sincerely, I give to you. Thanks to American heroes, whose devotion is second to none, whose courage and braveness alone caused many battles to be won. We have beaten the forces of evil, and carried our flag far and wide. Because of our American warriors, our hearts are filled with pride. Only because of you, the price you know we did pay. Only because of you, Old Glory still flies today.
Our guest speaker is a Vietnam veteran that enlisted in the U.S. Navy on October 23 in 1963, a month prior to former President John F. Kennedy's assassination. He served 2 years on a destroyer in the North Atlantic before volunteering to serve in Vietnam. Additional training in Colorado led him to Da Nang, Vietnam in November 1965, and was assigned a small boat crew. Later, he was reassigned to offload cargo ships in the Da Nang harbor. His second tour in Vietnam landed him on a destroyer as a gun crew captain, which provided offshore support to combat units. Honorably discharged, he joined the U.S. Navy Seabees Reserves and was a heavy equipment operator for 5 years while attending college. Following graduation from college and postgraduate work in journalism, he came to O'Neill and served as an editor at the Polk County Independent for 28 years. For his support of the Army National Guard and Reserves, he was named the Honorary Command Sergeant Major and an Honorary Colonel in the Nebraska National Guard. 14 years after leaving the Navy, he became concerned that the military was forgetting all the lessons learned in Vietnam, and he joined a large number of like-minded veterans who enlisted in the National Guard. He served in the O'Neill unit for 10 years as an infantryman, radio operator, nuclear, biological, and chemical weapon specialist, anti-tank infantryman, and a medic. He then transferred to the Army Reserves for 10 years, where he was trained in special operations as a paramedic, and completed training as a licensed practical nurse, which prepared him for his role in the O'Neill Care and Rehab. Additionally, he served in Germany, helping train troops being deployed to Bosnia, returned to Germany as a nurse to care for the wounded soldiers of Iraq and Afghanistan, and served as a paramedic in El Salvador, supporting units, building schools, and drilling water wells. He retired from the military in 2006, nearly 30 years after active duty and reserve service. Please help me welcome Burns McCullough.
Veterans and their wives, and one active duty today, only less than 1% of the people that are eligible to serve in the military do so. And when you do that, you sign a blank check to the government, which is payable up to including your life. Today, only 1 out of 8 people of service age are interested in the military. Only 1 out of 4 is eligible because of education, health, and criminal background. So that's where we are today on that. What I would like to do, there's a special thing going on today, and I'd like to give you a little background on that first. World War I was fought mainly in Eurasia and Africa from 1914 to 1918. It's been called the War to End All Wars. There were 18,360,000 people killed and who died in the war from battle, disease, or famine. The consequences of Germany's treatment after the war led to the Second War from 1939 to 1945, where 70 to 85 million people died. principles of constitutionalism, rule of law, and representative government. After the war, those principles were replaced with totalitarianism in Russia in 1917, and the rise of communism in Italy in 1922, Germany in 1933, and Spain in 1936 with the rise of National Socialism. Germany was seething with anger over the loss of Alsace-Lorraine to France after an 1870 war, and there were also hostilities towards Russia. So they developed a plan to invade France by way of Germany, or by way of Belgium, sorry, and then through Poland to prevent Russia from coming to France's aid. John Keegan, who was a former senior lecturer of military history at the British Royal Academy in Sandhurst, is one of the foremost historians of the war, and he said that the war could have been averted in the 15 weeks between the declaration of war and the first clash of arms if prudence and common sense had prevailed. Obviously, it did not. The Great War, as it is called, marked the end of the traditional way they fought war with the expansion of the railroad, which enhanced delivery of supplies. We had the use of poison gas, machine guns, tanks, and airplanes. By the end of 1914, there was a continuous line of trenches, 475 miles long, ran from the North Sea to the mountains of neutral Switzerland. Just as an example, Professor Keegan provided a scene from the Somme campaign in 1916, which was typical of the war. He said, descriptions of 0 hour abounded. Long lines of young men burdened with 60 pounds of equipment judged necessary to sustain them in a long struggle inside the German trenches. Plodding off almost shoulder to shoulder with good cheer and certainty of success, of individual displays of bravado, as in battalions which kicked a soccer ball ahead of the ranks, the bright sunshine breaking through the morning mist, of an illusion of an empty battlefield denuded of opponents, by the weight of the bomb bombardment and the explosion of 29 mine chambers, which were laboriously driven under the German lines as the attack began. Descriptions of what followed 0 hour abound also. Of the discovery of uncut wire after the creeping artillery barrage designed to cut the wire, the appearance of German defenders manning the parapets of the trenches at the moment the creeping barrage passed beyond the line, firing frenziedly at the approaching ranks. The opening gaps in the attacking waves, the massacre in the wave, for the wire entanglements, the advance was checked, faltered, and eventually came to a halt. The firing was so bad that the Germans, seeing that they were not in danger of being overrun, held their fire so the wounded could crawl from the battlefield. It took from the start of the battle on July 1 until July 3rd to remove all of the wounded. In that campaign, 200 British battalions began the attack with 100,000 men. Of those, 20,000 died, another 40,000 were wounded. The dead were buried where they died. During the war, many of those who died in battle could never be laid to rest. Bodies were blown to pieces by shell fire. Others were entombed in crumbled shell holes, collapsed in trenches, or decomposed in the broken soil of the battle. By war's end, the remains of nearly half of those remained lost. The war ended with an armistice which took effect on the 11th hour of the 11th month of 1918. A subsequent treaty forced Germany to give up its conquests of the 1870 war, surrendered the German settlements of Silesia and West Prussia to an independent Poland, disarmed the Russian army and dissolved the battle fleet and the air force. And they also forced Germany to pay reparations to the Allies. Rather than accepting the end of the war, Adolf Hitler in 1922 threw up a challenge. He said, it cannot be that 2 million Germans should have fallen in vain. No, we do not pardon, we demand vengeance. That vengeance cost Germany 7.7 million dead, including 4 million soldiers, the destructions of many cities in Europe, and the extermination of 6 million Jews. The United States entered the war in 1917 with over 24 million men registering for the military draft of 1917 and 18. Nearly 4 million joined ground forces in Europe by war's end. The United States suffered 53,402 dead and over 204,000 wounded. In the Second World War, by contrast, 418,500 American soldiers died. Today marks the 100th anniversary of Arlington National Cemetery's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, a monument to the unknown casualties of the war. The idea of the monument to honor the remains of the American soldiers who would never be identified and returned to their families originated in France and England, which buried the remains of their unknown soldier on Armistice Day 1920. France was buried theirs at the Arch de Triomphe in Paris, and Britain at Westminster Abbey in London. Germany attempted to build a monument to its lost soldiers in 1924, but the event turned into a day-long riot because of the very political distress in that country. On December 21st, 1920, U.S. Representative Hamilton Fish III, who served with the 369th Infantry Regiment, introduced legislation for the U.S. to honor an unknown American soldier. On October 24, 1921, Sergeant Edward F. Younger, twice wounded in the war and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor, was called from the Army of Occupation in Germany to Chalon-de-Combray in France to select the unknown soldier from 4 soldiers exhumed from American cemeteries. Younger thought he was called to be a pallbearer when he was handed a bouquet of white and pink roses by a Frenchman who lost 2 sons in the war and was told to pick the soldiers to be honored. He was left alone and said, "I walked among the coffins 3 times, then suddenly stopped. What caused me to stop, I don't know. It was as though something pulled me. A voice seemed to say, 'This is a pal of yours.' He placed the bouquet on the casket in front of him and saluted. The other 3 coffins were then reburied. The unknown soldier's casket was taken to Paris and remained overnight. And the next day, it was taken to the port of Le Havre, where it bore the U.S. Navy cruiser USS Olympia for the trip to Washington Navy Yard, where it arrived on October 25th. 2 storm fronts raged between Washington and France. Rather than place the casket on the deck of the cruiser, a special place was built near the bridge. Marine Guard were on duty round the clock, secured by lifelines to the ship, and one of the guards was almost thrown overboard. Upon arrival, the casket was taken to the Capitol and placed in the rotunda. As the body lay in state, an estimated 90,000 people paid their respects. The New York Times, in a special report, called the burial unlike the ceremony for Abraham Lincoln. There were tears of sorrow for Abraham Lincoln. There were tears today, but most of those who shed them were carried away by the emotion of the symbolism of patriotism which this unknown American embodied. The ceremony began at 6:30 a.m. with 8 service members carrying the casket down the Capitol steps and placing it in a caisson, lead a procession followed by a group of Medal of Honor recipients, a group of Gold Star wives, President Harding, General John Pershing, President Wilson, and dignitaries from France, Belgium, Britain, Italy, and Japan. The claims reported, surrounded by the world's greats, with none of them too great to bow in homage, this dead boy's funeral was no pageant, no spectacular drama, no worldly show. It was more a benediction. Washington has witnessed many notable ceremonies, but never one like this. The 7-mile procession ended at the cemetery at 11:40 a.m. and was greeted by a crowd of more than 100,000. President Harding was the main speaker, saying the soldier might have come from any one of millions of American homes. Hundreds of mothers are wondering today, finding a touch of solace in the possibility that the nation bows in grief over the body of the son she bore to live and die, if need be, for the Republic. We do not know the eminence of his birth, but we do know the glory of his death. He died for his country, and greater devotion hath no man than this. He died unquestioning, uncomplaining, with faith in his heart and hoping on his lips that his country should triumph and his civilization survive. As a typical soldier of this representative democracy, he fought and died, believing in the indisputable justice of his country's cause. This American soldier went forth to battle with no hatred for any people of the world, but hating war and hating the purpose of every war for conquest. Today's ceremonies proclaim that the hero unknown is not unhonored. On January 2nd, 1937, approval was given for a 24-hour guard at the tomb. On August 3rd, 1958, President Dwight Eisenhower signed a bill to honor the unknown military personnel who died fighting in World War II and the Korean War in separate crypts on the Tomb Plaza on Memorial Day weekend of 1958. On May 28, 1984, President Ronald Reagan accepted the internment flag for a then unknown soldier of the Vietnam War, whose remains were added to a third crypt. That soldier was formally identified by the Department of Defense on June 30th, 1998. The remains of Air Force First Lieutenant Michael Blassie and his remains were exhumed and repatriated to his family. That crypt is vacant today. There's a little bit of trivia. Lieutenant Blassie's wife, Kate Basilovic, came from a little town in eastern Nebraska called Omaha.
Thank you, Burns. It is formal protocol to stand during the playing of taps and place your hand over your heart and/or remove your cover and salute the flag. We will now learn the history of taps by Carson Bielik. When Carson is done, I'll ask you to please stand for the playing of the taps. Remain standing for the retirement of the colors. Thank you.
Of all military bugle calls, none is so easily recognized or more apt to evoke emotion than taps. The melody is both eloquent and haunting, and the history of its origin is interesting and somewhat clouded in controversy and myth. The use of taps is unique to the United States military, as the call is sounded at funerals, wreath-laying ceremonies, and memorial services. Taps originally began as a signal to extinguish lights. Up until the Civil War, the infantry call for extinguished lights was the one set down in the infantry manuals, which had been borrowed from the French. The music for taps was changed by Major General Daniel Adams Butterfield for his brigade in July of 1862. Butterfield was not pleased with the call for extinguished lights, feeling that it was too formal to signal the day's end. With the help of the brigade bugler, Oliver Wilcox Norton, he created taps to honor his men while encamped at Harrison's Landing, Virginia, following the 7 Days Battle during the Peninsular Campaign. Butterfield did not compose taps, but actually revised an earlier bugle call. The call we know today as taps existed in an earlier version of the call tattoo, which had gone out of use by the Civil War. Butterfield knew this early call from his days before the war as a colonel in the 12th New York Militia. As a signal at the end of the day, armies have used tattoo to alert troops to prepare for the evening roll call. Butterfield took the last 5.5 measures of the tattoo and revised them into the 24 notes that we know today. The new call soon spread to the other units of the Union Army. Oliver Wilcox Norton wrote about the experience later in his life. During the early part of the Civil War, I was a bugler at the headquarters of Butterfield's brigade. One day, soon after the 7 Days battles on the Peninsula, when the Army of the Potomac was lying in camp at Harrison's Landing, General Daniel Butterfield sent for me, and showing me some notes on a staff written in pencil on the back of an envelope, asked me to sound them on my bugle. I did this several times, playing the music as written. He changed it somewhat, lengthening some notes and shortening others, but retaining the melody as he first gave it to me. After getting it to his satisfaction, he directed me to sound that call for taps thereafter in place of the regulation call. The music was beautiful on that still summer night and was heard far beyond the limits of our brigade. The next day I was visited by several buglers from neighboring brigades, asking for copies of the music, which I gladly furnished. I think no general order was issued from Army headquarters authorizing the substitution of this for the regulation call, but as each brigade commander exercised his own discretion in such minor matters, the call was gradually taken up through the Army of the Potomac. The earliest official reference to the mandatory use of taps at military funeral ceremonies is found in the U.S. Army Infantry Drill Regulations for 1891. Although it had doubtless been used unofficially long before that time under its former designation of extinguished lights. The first use of taps at a funeral was during the Peninsular Campaign in Virginia. Captain John C. Tidwell of Battery A, 2nd Artillery, ordered it played for the burial of a cannoneer killed in action. Because the enemy was close, he worried that the traditional 3 volleys would renew fighting. The origin of the word taps is thought to have come from the Dutch word for tattoo, which is tap-toe. More than likely, taps comes from the 3 drum taps that were beat as a signal for extinguished lights when a bugle was not used.
All in on me. Forward, forward.
In conclusion of our program today, Veterans Day is set aside to honor veterans for their service, not only their service, their sacrifice. Please take time today to honor a veteran. This concludes our program, and thank you for coming.